call the movie The Matrix. I'm going to run the risk here of maybe losing some viewers who don't get the pop culture reference. But The Matrix was a movie that came out, it's been a while ago now. I guess I'm showing my age a little bit. But had all kinds of interesting themes spread throughout that movie, and I want to talk to you around one of the themes that came out in that first Matrix movie today, and ask you if you've had this moment in your life. A lot of the work I do is targeted towards people who are at or approaching or moving through the transition towards the second half of their life. What I mean by that is the point at which they are becoming who they are. This is a term that's drawn from psychoanalytic theory, Jungian psychotherapy, depth psychology. There's a lot of talk there about the first half of life being when we are born, when we grow up, when we learn to operate in this world, and often a big part of our first half of life is all about finding our place in the world. We start a career, we may have a family, we take a conventional path, we go through school, all of those things. The second half of life is a point at which a turning is made. I don't want to say that as if it's taken for granted that this always happens. Many people don't make this transition, or many people come upon this phase of their life and it works out quite negatively to what is popularly known as a midlife crisis, where we reach that point of realizing that we're kind of going over the hill in terms of life expectancy and years, and now we're starting to look towards the end, and you pass the threshold where you no longer have that sense that your whole life is ahead of you, but now very much much of it is behind you, and that gives us an existential type of dread. Body begins to get older, we have aches and pains that we didn't have before, it takes longer to recover. There's a sense that if we're going to be about any type of meaningful business, any type of meaningful work, we better begin now, because we're conscious of having less time than ever before, even though it's always true that none of us knows today could be our last day. But there's this general sense based on an average life expectancy and all of that now we're not just moving away from the beginning, but we're approaching the end. So with many people, this works out to be kind of an existential dread, a period of crisis, midlife crisis, during which they might try to switch jobs, start a new career, go buy an expensive car, have an affair, do any kinds of crazy things to try to regain a sense of their youth, a sense of the time that they feel is slipping away from them, that is lost, doing things that they felt they've never done. So anyway, it manifests in all sorts of different ways, but there is a middle passage that psychologists talk about, that I'm a big believer in, where if you have the right guidance, if you are able to navigate it, you emerge into the second half of life with a firm grasp now, not just on what the world expects of you and how you can fit into it, but of who you are as a person before all that. Before the voices and the influences came in and began to shape and mold you, or point you in a certain direction, or tell you that this was open to you, this path, but this one is not. Before perhaps you chose to follow a certain path, whether that was religious, ideological, career-based, whatever it was. You emerge into the second half of life now with a sense of who you are and why you're here, and you begin to wonder what you can do about that. And a lot of what I do and say and create is directed towards people at that stage in their life, and part of that is because I'm at this point in my life emerging into the second half of my life, and so it's all very fresh and new and real to me, and I also see a need for people who can assist in that process with those who are going through that middle passage. But that's all just to set up what I want to mention and talk about in this video today. And I want to go back to the Matrix movie. There was a point in the original Matrix movie where Neo, the main character, who was the one, is faced with a question of whether he will begin to believe in himself. And there's this tension at play from the time that Morpheus, his mentor, pulls him out of the Matrix and begins to influence him and begins to tell him what's really going on in the real world, and betrays his own belief that Neo is the one. He was the one who was prophesied who would come, who would liberate humanity from the Matrix and overthrow the rule of the machines who had enslaved humanity. Neo has a hard time believing this, that he has any kind of special destiny in relation to this grand epic drama that's unfolding around him. And Morpheus is all about it, though. He's a true believer, and he's trying to convince Neo, to get Neo to believe this for himself. And there comes a moment in that movie where, for the first time, Neo lives into this potential destiny that he's been told he has, that he's wrestling with inside of himself, wondering what his potentialities are, what his latent capabilities yet are, and how that can work out in the drama that he's involved in. And throughout the movie, the characters of the Matrix run into what are called agents. These are programmed authorities within the Matrix system, and they hunt down and they try to capture or kill the humans as they're inside of the Matrix program. And they're virtually unbeatable, undefeatable. No one has ever gone toe-to-toe with an agent and survived. So the recourse, the plan always, when an agent comes on the scene, is run. But there comes a moment in this first movie, and I want to show it to you here in just a moment, where Neo, instead of turning and running away, stops at the last moment and turns to face the agent. And Morpheus and one of the other humans who are watching this happen outside of the Matrix are arrested by this. Instead of turning to run, which is the conditioned response, which is what everybody does, because nobody can beat these agents unless they happen to be the one. Neo now has chosen to stop and turn and face this one that he's encountered. And it's like kind of a climactic moment. It's a point of decision. It's a turning point. And the one who is, the person who is with Morpheus on the outside says, "What is he doing?" And Morpheus just looks and says he's beginning to believe. Take a look at that clip right now. Okay, so you saw the clip. You have my remarks leading up to it. And now I just wanted to apply it to you in any way I can here. Asking you, have you had this moment for yourself? There has to come a point. There often does come a point with those of us who have navigated to whatever extent successfully, we might call it the first half of life, and who are either going through this middle passage, who are approaching it, who are emerging out the other side, where you face this point of self-discovery, self-realization, to use the term of Abraham Maslow, self-actualization, where you begin to believe in yourself, your own abilities, your own capabilities, your own potentiality, all that is largely yet unexplored and unknown to you. For the first time, you begin to make choices different than the way you made them before during the first half of life. Not now governed by the fear and the social conditioning that you had grew up with, that you had been trained with, in a sense, but now based on this emerging sense of self, newfound sense of selfhood that you have, individuality. You turn and you face the agent, you face the fear, you face the thing, whatever it is that you've been avoiding, and you begin to believe in yourself. Have you had that moment? Moments, because I'm not going to say it's just one moment. I do think in many people's experience there is a time, there is an initial moment, maybe perhaps among moments, where we choose, instead of turning and running like we always did before, we stop and we turn and we face this thing. We face life, we face reality, we face our circumstances, we face squarely our dreams, the things that we've put off, the things that we've not believed were possible, not within our own reach. We begin to act differently towards those things. We begin essentially to believe. If you haven't had this moment, I can't tell you to have it because it's not something that you can just manufacture, that you can go make happen. But I want to put this in your mind as something to consider, something to think about. Perhaps you've had moments where you were faced with a choice and you've turned and you've ran. But if your experience is anything like my experience has been leading up to this middle passage, this entrance and emergence into the second half of life, you'll get many opportunities like this. Life, the universe, God, however you want to understand it, will present you with many encounters, many moments where you will be given a choice. Do I turn and run from this, or am I for the first time going to face up to it? Am I going to begin to believe in my own self, in my own potential? This doesn't make you superhuman when you emerge onto this path, your own self-directed, self-chosen path. It doesn't mean you won't fail. It's quite the opposite. You'll fail quite a bit. You might not even be successful ultimately in whatever it is that you seek to do, but something will happen inside of you, both as a result of and in response to your choice, the choice you make, such as in this moment, to turn and face down that thing that you've been running from all your life. So have you had your moment yet? Have you had your Neo moment? Have you had that moment where for the first time you begin to believe in yourself? And not because Morpheus believes in it, not because other people have told you that you should be able to do something or that you should be someone special. And not even with kind of a grand illusion that you're better than anybody else or that you're anything more special than the next person, but that you are unique. You are uniquely you. You are an individual. And that's a whole part of this process of entering into the second half of life, is discovering and actualizing your unique selfhood, your unique personhood, that which you were before you grew up, before you began to assume the roles that society placed upon you, that you learned through school, that you learned through participation in the workforce. Maybe you've done all of that, but now you're undergoing this passage, this crisis, where you're beginning to see who you really are. Jung called this process individuation, the process of becoming who you are. And this is a privilege, the privilege of a lifetime, he called it. Not everybody gets the opportunity to go through it, and not everybody who does get the opportunity successfully navigates that path. And so a lot of what I do is encouraging people to be able to successfully navigate that path and enter into and enjoy and actualize the second half of their life to become who they are. So consider that today. Tell me what you think about that illustration, analogy, whatever. If you've never seen the movie, sorry, maybe all this is all lost on you, but go watch the movie. It's a great movie. It's got all kinds of awesome themes that are applicable to many things we face in life. But have you had that moment? If you haven't yet, and you continue on this path, you will. And there will come a moment, I suspect, when you will turn finally and face the things that you've been running from throughout the first half of your life. And when you do, everything is going to change.